being here. Thank you for having me judge this very difficult but very pleasurable contest. It is my pleasure to present our winner, Lily Taylor, to you this evening. I was after some details of biography. It's very strange to be a judge in this contest because it was completely anonymous. So of course, as you know from, say, listening to podcasts or the radio or reading, you have a picture of the author. And reading this incredible essay, this was not what I pictured. And so meeting her just the other day, it was an amazing and wonderful surprise to find a very young but also very talented writer for the first time. She has degrees from Oklahoma and from Auburn University, and as you know, I am from Alabama, so I really should not be interacting at all. When she leaves us here, she is on her way to the University of Virginia to begin her study of law, her reading in the law. Virginia. Go Warriors. Okay. As the prize, and this prize is very important because as a short story writer or an essayist, boy, I tell you, novels get everything. And so as a prose writer of short things, it is amazing to have such a prize recognize this genre. Often, and maybe some of you even think that, a short story or an essay is just a book that hasn't grown up yet. That's not true. I believe that the short story and the essay are as different from the novel as poetry is different from the novel. It is its own thing. It has its own rules, its own type of aesthetics, and there are very few recognitions of this form, which is, by the way, an incredible American form. It goes back to Poe and to Hawthorne and to Washington Irving. And so for us as Americans to ignore this as part of our culture, it really does need to be corrected, and I thank you very much for that. So the way that worked is I get the things anonymously, I'm reading them. One of the other things about the short story and the essay that writers worry is the notion that a story is a story. That is, it tells a narrative, it tells a story. And the thing that we use to do that, language, is by its nature a linear thing. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It wants to be a story. It wants to be a story. But there are people, writers, who for some reason actually want to go against that existential advantage of language. We usually call them poets. That is, they're not telling stories, they are instead doing something else. And that is, we can call for tonight, the lyric. They're lyrical prose writers. So an interesting hybrid between the narrative prose writer and the poet doing poetry. A very difficult rope to walk, but this particular essay did it very well. So let me read my little blurb here of when I needed to send it and say, this is the winner. Now remember, no idea who this person is. On Impressionism, the title of the piece, caught my eye as it is about catching one's eye. How one's eye is caught, exactly. The essay expertly exerts pressure on the word impressionism, or impression, and forces like one would force a bulb to flower, a panoply of meanings, emotions, and memories. The essay works like the impressionist paintings it regards. And by the way, I actually got to see the pictures. This is another thing about writing. It's so great with our computers now. We just push a button and we can, grab a picture. And the essay that I received did have pictures of impressionist paintings, which the essay refers to. However, that's a little shady, a little sketchy there because of licensing and reproduction. So unfortunately, your copy here won't have those pictures, but they are accessible, and you'll know which ones she's referring to. Impressionist paintings it regards I'll read that again. The essays work like the impressionist paintings it regards in suggestion, nuance, juxtaposition, and collage. It invites, allows, and encourages a collaboration to exist between the writer and the reader that is complex, layered, ethereal, and concrete. It is microscopic and multidimensional, and was brilliant at cantilever these elements elegantly together. So I hope that gives you at least a sense, or at least a tease, of what this essay is about. And I like to say, in that, back to that lyrical and narrative fight, that instead of the plot, what we have here is the blot. Just imagine putting the pen down on a piece of paper and watching the ink spread in all directions. That's a good metaphor for this kind of essay, that it doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have a middle, doesn't have an end. It has a kind of atmosphere or smorgasbord of things that the reader can go through in a variety of ways. It's an amazing achievement, and our deserving winner is Lily.
Even while I'm speaking, because we're talking about beauty, and I think everyone needs a glass of wine when we talk about such a thing, so please feel free. Thank you, Sony and Michael, so much. I couldn't be more excited to be here. In the short time I've spent on the grounds, I've been overwhelmed by this incredible community of artists, but also by Chautauqua's commitment to fostering a place where art in all forms is celebrated. If you can't tell by my baby face, I'm pretty young. And so because of that, I have been surrounded by a generation which I feel doesn't appreciate art in the way I wish that they sometimes would. And so being here, surrounded by all of you, I can't tell you how much it means to me, and it's been a really rare and beautiful experience. So I am humbled and honored to be here with you all today. And with that said, let's dive into the world of lyricism, the essay, and impressions. Years ago, I saw a blog post from the Poetry Foundation titled, "The average fourth grader is a better poet than you and me too." Intrigued, and maybe just a little bit insulted, I read the article. Here are some examples of fourth grade poetry. Writing about a terminal illness. I am feeling burdened, and I taste milk. I mumble, "Please, please run away." But it lives where I live. Another poem went, "Away went a dull winter wind that rocked harshly, and bent, you said, Father, Father." Those examples were enough for me to buy the blog title's claim. The average fourth grader really was a better poet than me. But how, I wondered, was it possible for these 9-year-olds to write this way? The blog's author, Hannah Gamble, answers that question by saying, "These young writers are addressing subjects that still obsess poets 50 years older: sadness, death, love, responsibility, aging, family, loneliness, and refuge. And they are addressing these subjects in language that is new, and thus has the power to emotionally affect a well-seasoned, or what we may call jaded, reader. The average fourth grader is able to do this because she hasn't been alive long enough to know how to do it, and by it, I mean talk about the world any other way." This year's Janus Prize sought work that dared formal and aesthetic innovations and upset and reordered readers' imaginations. In other words, I thought, they were looking for work as unconstrained as that of the fourth graders, a piece that shirked expectations and played with what we may typically consider, in my case, an essay. When I think back to early drafts of On Impressions, I remember poring over Jericho Parham's collection Lost Wax. The title essay interwove a story about an old romance with an investigation into Greek sculpture. It was, from my perspective, the quintessential lyric essay. In other words, through her surprising combination of themes, through her section breaks and form, I was invited into her work. I made room for myself in the white space, found a roof under her ink, and rested against the margins. I'm sure many of you have heard the saying that writers can only bring 50% of meaning to their work, and that readers bring the other 50%. I would argue that in the case of the lyric essay, that's not quite accurate. Nonfiction writer Elena Passarello, director of Oregon State's MFA program, visited my class at Auburn last year. While there, she described the lyric essay to us as addressing the tension between the reader and the written work. The lyric essay functions to try and bridge the gap between author and reader, accepting the chasm that inherently separates the two and working to overcome it. What does this mean for the lyric essayist? Freedom, both a gift and a burden. A gift, of course, because it allows flexibility, the likes of which, until you've encountered a lyric essay, may seem surprising. But it's a burden, too. The writer is no longer bringing 50% of meaning. They're passing over trust to the reader who must be alert, engage deeply, and seek what might not at first glance seem evident. If you, like I was a short year and a half ago, are still wondering what exactly a lyric essay is, Iowa's John DeGotta says, we might as well call it the lyric essay, because I don't think essay means for most readers what essayists hope it does. Or we might as well call it the lyric essay, because creative nonfiction, let's face it, is desperate. Then again, as literary terms go, lyric essay is no less an example of lipstick on a pig. And yet, 15 years ago, when I was a student in a nonfiction writing program, the term felt like an extraordinary gift. I liked the challenge of writing in between the two worlds of poetry and essay. And as these things go when you're fully immersed in a new and exciting passion, I started to see everything through the lens of that hybridity. Like DeGotta, when my nonfiction professor, Justin Gardner, first introduced the term, I was rapturously taken by it. I'd spent years learning about genre, its conventions, its limitations, how to write what readers want and deliver what they expect. The lyric essay laughs at this. And for the first time in what felt like too long, I was excited to write. Many believe that the difference between creative nonfiction and poetry is that creative nonfiction is grounded in fact, and it's concerned with accurately representing real events, people, and places, while poetry is more concerned with artistic expression and often employs figurative language and symbolism to convey meaning. This means that creative nonfiction might be more straightforward, while poetry may be more open to interpretation. But the beauty of the lyric essay, like Michael said, is the marriage of these genres. It's unique and experimental. It does talk about real events and people, but it incorporates elements of poetry, giving it that lyric and expressive style. When I started writing On Impressions, I was in my second semester of graduate school. It was the second lyric essay I had ever attempted, and the only instructions from my professor was that he wanted the essay to be braided. In other words, he wanted us to find 3 or more distinct topics, which he called braids, and have our writing twine them together. As I wrote this way, I learned how to spot connections between seemingly disparate ideas and how to write those ideas around one another to find a spark. I realized that it's through the shifts in theme and tone that the essay comes to reveal something deeper than what I've written on the page. I see it now as the closest thing we have to magic. But what was I to write about? I thought back to Elena's visit and remembered a particularly salient piece of advice. Your goal, she said, should be to illuminate cool shit and discover the ways that shit affects your life. Cool shit, I thought. There was plenty of that out there. How would I ever narrow it down? It wasn't until I started thinking about myself and what affected my life that I landed on the topic of my essay and worked my way backward toward cool shit. When my classmates would ask me for advice for their own essays, one metaphor often flew off of my tongue. Search your body, I would say. Find the bruises. And once you find one, press it. You might be surprised by how much it does, or doesn't, hurt to touch. Like any other artist whose particular vice is investigating pain, I discovered that I was covered in bruises. Some were metaphorical, fresh shades of blue and green, or older browns and yellows that only I could see. But others were real, the remnants of cosmetic procedures I'd undertaken. That's where I began on impressions. In life, which already provides enough pain, why had I chosen to inflict pain upon myself? To give myself bruises I need not have, all in the name of seeking beauty? The answer wasn't clear to me at first. As I wrote on impressions, I quickly settled on my main braids, guided by one word. Shocker, impressions. I've always had an affinity for Monet's art, and as one of the leaders of the Impressionism movement, he was a clear choice for braid one. The second braid focused on the traditional definition of the word impression, an idea, feeling, or opinion about something or someone, especially one formed without conscious thought or on the basis of little evidence. In this braid, I investigate the ways that a body can make an impression. More specifically, the impression I desired my body to give. The connection between the braids is not clear until later in the essay, but it boils down to this. How is art similar to the way I view my body and the changes I make to it? How are the two dissimilar? Is it reasonable to call plastic surgery and aesthetic body modifications as akin to art? Or is that a narcissistic or mistaken comparison? In the end, I realized that while I want to believe the changes I make to myself are like art, it's self-deceiving. It's still painful to admit that. Like any terrible first draft, my intentions were wrong. I was not yet ready to admit that while I wanted to be like the rebel Monet, to see myself in his unconstrained brushstrokes, my choices fell much more in line with those who, in Monet's time, rejected his work. The Paris Salon, where every artist of that era hoped their work would be exhibited, stopped showcasing his paintings when he turned to Impressionism. Like the genre-bending lyric essay, Impressionist art didn't fit with what was typical. Monet broke away from their rigid ideas of what painting was. He included small, visible brushstrokes that offered the bare impression of form, left unblended color, and emphasized the accurate depiction of natural light. Like the lyric essay, Impressionist art invites one in, encouraging one's mind to pick up where the artist left off. While I was happy to break with convention in my writing, I was terrified of doing so in my real life. And so, as I reworked the essay, I stopped forcing a connection between myself and Monet and admitted to my own failure. I sought the praise of the salon. Of course, today's salon is quite different than that of Monet's time. It's widespread but ethereal, championed by social media and innovations in cosmetic surgery. But to say that vanity is new, or to subscribe to the notion that we face different pressures today than the generations before us, is a fallacy. In that same vein, I cannot, in good conscience, say that what I have written, the lyric essay, is truly innovative. As Degatta writes, "It's not that I've stopped finding the term lyric essay interesting or useful. Instead, as I got older and started to explore the history of the good old-fashioned essay, I began to find that everything that I loved about lyric essays was already represented in much of the essay's past. What I therefore hoped, or what I naively assumed, was that if we could remind ourselves, as essayists, of the variety of essays that have been written in our genre, we'd have no need for terms that try to stake their claim on narrowly conceived interpretations of the genre." Perhaps this assertion of Degatta's that the lyric essay is nothing new, and that to define only certain essays as such unnecessarily limits the nonfiction genre, is why, when I told Professor Gardner I was a finalist for this year's Janus Prize, he told me that he was thrilled that I had no chance to win. "It's just not that weird," he said. "I don't think it's what they're looking for." I absolutely agreed. To the two of us, who had spent a semester immersed in the lyric essay, nothing about On Impressions seemed daring enough. When I won, I was left to wonder, how does my essay fit the prize's challenge to reorder expectations? Had I, in my search to write in an unconstrained way, or in other words, to write as a fourth grader, really gone so far as to write something that different? Claire Vaye Watkins, in her essay on pandering, says, I have been writing to impress old white men. Countless decisions I've made about what to write and how to write it have been an acquiescence to the opinions of the white male literati. Not only acquiescence, but a beseeching, approval-seeking, people-pleasing. But whom do I mean when I say white male literati? Sounds like a conspiracy theory. I mean the people and voices, real and imagined, in the positions of power, or at least influence, in writing and publishing. But mostly I mean the man in my mind. James Baldwin wrote of the little white man deep inside all of us, but mine is tall. He's a white-haired chain smoker from New Mexico, the short story writer called Cheever's True Air. It is Lee K. Abbott I hear in my mind. When I read this in Watkins' essay, I found myself confronted with a terrible realization. It was not a white man I wrote for, although I did sometimes hear Professor Gardner as I typed. No, my answer seems much more narcissistic, and in some ways, terrifying. I wrote for myself. Like any pessimistic young artist, I never anticipated my work to be read by anyone but my professor. Who would be interested in this short life of mine? No one but myself, I was sure. And this freed me to, though unintentionally, write something that did reorder readers' expectations. I was unencumbered by trying to write what might make sense. I wrote as I felt, chaotically. Short, frenzied statements, long, winding paragraphs, breaks and callbacks and metaphors that, for all I knew, would never make sense to anyone else. So why did this work? I can think of only one answer: the power of emotional truth. I learned early on that the best nonfiction dives into the mundane details. It is specific. It may seem counterintuitive, but why would a reader care about those specific moments they may have no experience with? I realized, though, that only through specificity do we hit real emotion. Only through concrete sensory details, through painting a picture one brushstroke at a time, can a reader come to feel something. And that's the whole point. It's emotion which is universal. The situation of the author may be unfamiliar, but their emotions are not. That's where connection occurs. While it may be true that writing for myself is narcissistic, it's also been a gift. When you write that which you find interesting, when you find the bruise that when you poke it, sets your body on fire with pain, truth emerges. Truths that, had I another reader in mind, I may not have been brave enough to put on the page. It's a cliche, though often true, that women are known for not liking to share their age. For those women who go under the knife, who have saline bags on their chest, whose loose skin is sliced away, whose fat is suctioned down a tube, they are often more loath to admit to it than they are to reveal when they were born. But I already knew what I'd had done. The filler in my lips, the whittled down and veneered over teeth, the fat freezing of my stomach. I had nothing to hide from myself. As I thought more about winning this prize, I realized that it may not have been just due to a different form, or the inclusion of pictures of Monet's artwork, or the fourth wall breaks and on impressions that help it live up to the prize's charge. Maybe it's the peeling back of the curtain on those surprising details of vanity, the grotesqueness of seeking beauty that felt different. The lyric essay has a well-documented history. Can the same be said of what we women think, how we feel, as we pay to be maimed? Near the end of On Pandering, Watkins admits, I'm trying to write something urgent, trying to be vulnerable and honest, trying to listen, trying to identify and articulate my innermost feelings, trying to make you feel them too, trying a kind of telepathy, all of which is really fucking hard in the first place. And in a culture wherein women are subject to infantilization and gaslighting, in a culture that says your telepathic heart is dumb and delicate and boring and frippery and for girls, I sometimes wonder if it's even possible. I've built a working miniature replica of the patriarchy in my mind. I would like very much to bust it up or burn it down, but I am afraid I don't know how, though I do have some ideas. Like Watkins, I have a miniature replica I seek to destroy. The image of myself, beautiful, thin, confident. I've worshipped at the altar of this image for far too long. But what do you replace it with? If you're not writing for the white man or for yourself, who or what do you write for? It may feel impossible, or at least the fodder of philosophers who may never reach a consensus, to accurately assess how we as humans view the world. But recently, using algebraic topology, scientists discovered that our brains process the world in an astounding 11 dimensions. Human brains are estimated to have a staggering 86 billion neurons, with multiple connections with each cell webbing in every possible direction, forming the vast cellular network that somehow makes us capable of thought and consciousness. With such a huge number of connections to work with, it's no wonder we still don't have a thorough understanding of how the brain's neural network operates. But the algebraic topology framework takes us one step closer to understanding. According to the researchers, algebraic topology provides mathematical tools for discerning details in the neural network, both in a close-up view of the individual neurons and a grander scale of the brain structure as a whole. By connecting these two levels, the researchers could discern high-dimensional geometric structures in the brain formed by collections of tightly connected neurons, called cliques, and the empty spaces, called cavities, between them. The researchers found a remarkably high number and variety of these cliques and cavities, which had not been seen before in neural networks, either biological or artificial. The model could zoom into networks to find hidden structures, which we could call the trees in the forest, and see the empty spaces, or the clearings in the forest, all at the same time. Those clearings and cavities are actually really important for brain function. When researchers gave their virtual brain tissue a stimulus, they saw that neurons were reacting to it in a highly organized manner. The scientists say, it's as if the brain reacts to a stimulus by building and then raising a tower of multidimensional blocks, starting with rods, then planks, then cubes, and then more complex geometries with 4D, 5D, etc. Another notes the progression of activity through the brain resembles a multidimensional sandcastle that materializes out of the sand and then disintegrates. So there is perhaps a concrete answer to how we process. But the concrete is less fascinating than what the philosophers have to say on the subject, even if they never agree. In Plato's Symposium, he tells a story about a gathering in ancient Athens. The gathering was a dinner party, and as might be expected of a dinner of philosophers, they begin to share their interpretations of love. Pausanias differentiated between two types of love: common love, associated with physical desires, and heavenly love, based on virtue and the soul. Eryximachus presents a more scientific view of love, associating it with harmony and balance within the body and the universe. Agathon focuses on the beauty of love, emphasizing its connection to youthfulness and praise. That one I perhaps understand the best. Socrates takes a different approach and questions the nature of love. He recounts his conversation with Diotima, who presents love as a spiritual journey toward the understanding of beauty and the eternal. She says, when we're young, we begin by loving a body, and then we learn eventually how to love different bodies, and then how to love souls, and then customs, and then finally, knowledge. Although Plato recounts their views on love, he didn't attend the dinner. In fact, he heard all of this not secondhand, but his is actually a fifth-hand account. Why is this important? We learn from the philosophers that love has many interpretations. You might subscribe to one of these philosophical definitions, or find every suggestion to be but a layer in the multi-layered truth of it. We see here how, though the function of how the brain processes might be the same for all of us, our conclusions differ. We learn from Plato that knowledge is just as multifaceted, and that, as his account of this dinner is not firsthand, what he is relaying might not be totally accurate. Does it matter? Is there one way to love? Is there one way to absorb knowledge? Or to bring us back? Is there one way to write an essay? To me, the ideas of the philosophers is a much more comfortable space. It's not concrete, but intangible. It allows for those, to use the scientist metaphor, sandcastles to be built in our brains. But how do we know if our sandcastles look the same? And would we even want them to? I'm no scientist, but I'd postulate that they don't. They are made of the same materials, those billions of neurons, but their architecture must differ. If you allow me to push the metaphor further, then I find that when I write nonfiction, my goal is to become a fourth grader on the beach, building my own sandcastle, and in doing so, hoping to inspire others to build their own as well. In the case of the lyric essay, it might be more fitting to say that I build nothing, or if I do build something, then my sandcastle is unadorned. Instead, I hand out shovels and molds to my reader, urging them to build the castle instead. It is not the final product. As the scientists say, these castles are razed to the ground anyway, but it's the process of building. When the essay is over, and we're once again surrounded by flat sand, it's the knowledge that building took place, that neurons connected, that we flitted between trees and clearings, that matters. Degata ends his essay by saying, despite the lyric essay's clumsy title then, this is not about the dangers or virtues of nonfiction, creative nonfiction, rash this, long form that, or any other terms we might throw against the genre in hopes of finding something that might finally stick. This is about the beautiful, gangly breadth of this unnameable literary form, and how nomenclature, while often limiting, polarizing, inadequate, and always stupid, can also be the thing that opens up our genre to new possibilities and new paths of inquiry, helping us to shape our experiences in the world in ways we have not yet imagined. We might as well call it the lyric essay, therefore, because we need as many terms as there are passions for this form. So call me a lyric essayist. I gladly wear the chains of burdening myself with such a title, as these chains are comfortable, translucent, and extend forever. I end on impressions with this line. My flower, as it were, has blossomed, and I am floating on the water. Is it enough that I am seen, or is this essay proof that I also want to be heard? Today, I am heard. My work has entered the world, where brains that are not mine will process the words I've written. What a privilege that is. Now I challenge all of us here. Build sandcastles. Build them high and wide, with turrets and tunnels that defy physics and gravity. Then destroy them. Bend possibilities, or better yet, break them. Find the fourth grader in you, just as I search for the one inside of me. It's not regression to discover this child within us, but transcendence. If it's painful, lean into it. Learn to love the feeling of scrubbing yourself raw, of exposing nerve to air. Then let art, yours or your experience of someone else's, be the balm, the warm bath you sink into. All right, y'all don't have to listen to me for too much longer. I'm just gonna give some thank yous and I'm gonna get out of your hair. So, first of all, thank you so much to Chautauqua and Chautauqua Institution for not only caring about art, but for valuing young writers. Your community here is unmatched, and I truly will never be able to put into words, even though I like to put words on the page, I can't do it now, how much this means to me. To Sunny Toname, the Michael Iredell Director of Literary Arts, thank you for being a kind, warm soul who lights up a room and makes others feel heard and cherished. That's a rare gift. To Michael Martone, thank you for seeing in my work what I never dreamed might be seen. To have won this prize is an honor, but for you to have chosen it, a writer whose work I look up to and cherish, only makes it that much more special. To Justin Gardner, who is not here, but who I always feel in spirit when I look at my work, thank you for challenging me, for your blunt honesty, and for being the best mentor an essayist could hope to have. To my mother and father, whose faith in me is unwavering, and who ceaselessly and tirelessly put my needs before their own. I can never thank you both enough. Thank you to donors, Barbara, Twig, and Hillary Branch, for funding the Janus Prize, and for believing in the power of a prize that celebrates emerging writers. The work you two do means everything. And thank you to everyone here tonight, for letting me be heard, and for being my first readers. Thank you so much.
Raise your hand if you're inspired. Lily, thank you so much. This is already an incredible evening, and I want to make sure you are all encouraged to meet Lily tonight, to meet her amazing parents, Julie and Billy, because boy, you've done something right. And I just wanted to pause for one moment before we invite you to drinks and to appetizers and to celebrate this amazing evening. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Deborah Sinea Moore, and I'm the Chief Program Officer here. And the first thing I wanted to do was just join Lily in offering deep thanks to Twig and Barbara Branch for this.